Welcome to World War II Stories for Sleep. Tonight, there is nothing urgent for you to do. There is nowhere you need to go. There is no task you need to finish, no thought you need to hold tightly in your mind. You can let the day loosen its grip. You can let the room around you become quiet. You can allow your shoulders to drop a little. Let your hands rest. Let your jaw soften. Let your breathing slow down, not because you force it, but because there is no need to hurry here. You're only listening. You're only drifting. You're only following a quiet path through history, one slow image at a time. This is not a story of battle. This is not a story of noise or sudden movement. This is not the famous version of war told through speed, fire, or spectacle. This is a quiet story from the hidden edges of history, from the long hours that are rarely remembered, from the shipyards, the workshops, the dim corridors, the mess tables, the engine rooms, the night watches, and the small human moments that lived inside a great machine before history turned it into a symbol. Tonight, we are going to the Yamato, the Japanese battleship Yamato, one of the largest battleships ever built, a ship whose name would later carry weight, sorrow, ambition, secrecy, engineering, pride, loss, and the deep silence of the sea. But this is not the loud story. This is not the story of the Yamato as a legend first. This is the quieter one, the untold story, the story of steel before it became myth, of workers before the ship sailed, of hands on metal, of lamps over drafting tables, of men eating rice in crowded rooms, of engineers listening to machinery, of sailors folding blankets, writing letters, cleaning boots, holding cups, looking at photographs, and walking through the long interior of a ship too large for any one man to fully know. If you drift in and out, that is all right. You do not need to remember every date. You do not need to hold every name. You may let the facts pass gently, like water moving over the side of a hull. Some details may stay, some may fade. That is enough, warm enough, slow enough, known enough. Imagine now that the modern room around you begins to fade. The walls soften, the present becomes quiet, the light around you lowers, the sounds of today move farther away, as if someone has closed a door very gently. And in the darkness behind your closed eyes, another place begins to appear. Japan, the early 1940s, a harbour city, Kura, a naval town on the inland sea. The air is cool before morning. The sky is dark blue, almost black, with a pale edge beginning somewhere beyond the low hills. The water of the harbour lies still in the protected basin, not perfectly still, but calm enough to hold soft reflections from the docks. The smell is salt, iron, coal smoke, damp rope, wet wood, oil, seaweed, paint, and metal warmed and cooled again by the long labour of shipbuilding. There are hills in the distance, there are roofs close together, there are workshops, cranes, rail lines, warehouses, stacks of steel, coils of cable, timbers dark with damp. The slow shape of a naval yard before the day has fully begun. Nothing unusual. Only the ordinary beginning of work. A man crossing a yard with a lunch bundle wrapped in cloth. Another man pulling his coat tighter against the morning air. A foreman checking a paper under a lamp. A cart rolling slowly over uneven ground. A small office where pencils are sharpened. A drafting room where plans sleep under weights. A gate where workers pass in with quiet faces. The shipyard at Kura was not only a place of machines, it was a place of footsteps, meals, coughs, ink, sweat, orders, weather, deadlines, pride, fatigue, small jokes, small fears, the sound of hammers, the sound of cranes, the sound of steel plates moved into place, the sound of boots on wet boards, the sound of men working around something so large that, while it was still incomplete, it seemed less like a ship and more like a piece of landscape under construction. The Yamato was built in secrecy. That is one of the famous facts. The great ship was hidden from ordinary view. Screens, roofs, controlled access, silence, paperwork, military caution. The world was not meant to see clearly what was being made. But secrecy, from inside, does not feel dramatic every hour. Often it feels like routine. A guard checking a pass. A worker told not to speak of measurements. A draftsman folding a plan. A supervisor lowering his voice. A number written carefully and not repeated outside the room. A canvas screen moving slightly in the wind. A ship growing behind barriers. Day after day, plate after plate, rivet after rivet, calculation after calculation. But in those early days, the great ship was not yet a symbol. It was only a problem of engineering and human patience. Steel had to be cut. Steel had to be moved. Steel had to be fitted. Plates had to align. Frames had to rise. Compartments had to take shape. Cables had to be planned. Machinery had to be installed. Men had to climb ladders. Men had to mark lines. Men had to check gauges. Men had to carry tools. Men had to eat, sleep, return, and begin again. He cleaned, he measured, he lifted, he waited, he checked, he ate, he slept, he returned. This is the untold part of the story, not the famous version, the quieter one. The Yamato began as drawings, lines on paper, plans under lamps, curves calculated carefully, weights considered, armour thickness, turret placement, engines, boilers, compartments, magazines, crew spaces, ventilation, pipes, the great invisible body of a ship before the visible hull rose. In a drafting room at Kure, before the morning whistle, a young naval draftsman might have sat with his sleeve pulled back, one hand steadying the edge of a sheet, the other moving a pencil along a ruler. His name, for our story, is Kenji Morita. He is 26. He is not famous. He will not appear in most histories. But he belongs here because no large ship is built only by admirals and decisions. It is built by many unnamed hands. Kenji knows the feel of paper under his palm. He knows the smell of ink and dust. He knows the discipline of lines. A wrong line can travel into steel. A wrong figure can become weight, delay, danger, confusion. So he works slowly, even when men above him want speed. He checks, then checks again. Near him, older draftsmen speak little. Their concentration fills the room. A lamp hums. A kettle somewhere clicks faintly as water heats. A window is covered partly against the morning glare that will come later. On the table are rulers, pencils, erasers, dividers, ink pens, ashtrays, paperweights, and cloths for wiping hands. Small objects beside a giant idea. That is how large things often begin. Not with thunder, with a pencil, with a table, with a line drawn carefully enough to become steel. Kenji has a small photograph tucked inside his notebook. His wife and their infant daughter. The photograph is not displayed. It stays between pages. He does not look at it while working because sentiment has no place near measurements. At least, that is what he tells himself. But sometimes, late in the evening, when the room has thinned and the last lamps are low, he opens the notebook and looks once, only once, then closes it. The ship in the yard grows by day. His daughter grows at home. Both, in different ways, require patience. Outside the drafting office, the shipyard wakes. Men arrive in groups. Some talk, some do not. A few carry metal lunch tins. A few carry cloth bundles. Some have hands already rough from years of work. Some are younger and still learning how to move safely around steel that does not forgive carelessness. There is a rhythm to the yard, not musical exactly, more like weather made by labour. Hammer, pause, hammer, a shout, a crane chain tightening, metal dragging, boots, a whistle, a cart, water against stone, a hammer again. The unfinished hull of the Yamato dominates the place around it. A huge form under construction, not elegant yet, not fully shaped, more like a skeleton being given armour. Its scale changes the way men move near it. A worker walking below does not think about the full ship every second. He thinks about the plate in front of him, the bolt, the heat, the instruction, the ladder, the tool, the man beside him. But sometimes, when he steps back, or when a fog lifts in the morning, or when light falls across the rising form, he sees the size of what they are making and grows quiet. The Yamato was meant to be more than a ship. Many men understood that, even if no one said it plainly. It was meant to carry national ambition, naval doctrine, industrial strength, engineering secrecy, a belief in decisive battle, a belief that steel could answer uncertainty. But to the workers at Kure, it was also work. Difficult work, heavy work, exact work. The kind of work that enters the body, shoulders, wrists, back, eyes, hands. At midday, men eat in whatever space is allowed. Rice, pickles, tea, fish when available, soup when possible, food carried from home, food eaten quickly, Food eaten slowly by older men who know a pause is part of endurance. A worker named Sato sits near a wall with his lunch on his knees. He's 43. He has worked in shipyards long enough to understand that every large vessel produces two things at once: the ship itself and tired men. Sato unwraps his rice. Beside him, a younger worker named Haru rubs one palm with the thumb of his other hand. A small cut. Nothing serious. Enough to sting. Sato looks at it. Clean it. It is nothing. That is when trouble begins. Haru gets up and finds water. Nothing unusual. Only the ordinary discipline of a shipyard. A small cut cleaned before it becomes more. A tool placed back before it is lost. A measurement repeated before steel is fixed. A plank moved before someone trips. The quiet wisdom of men who know that large disasters often begin in small neglect. The Yamato's construction required secrecy, but secrecy did not make the work silent. Steel is never silent. Cranes complain, plates ring, hammers strike, drills bite, engines move, men call out. The air trembles in sections of the yard. Inside the hull, sounds become strange. A hammer blow echoes differently in a compartment than in open air. A footstep becomes hollow. A voice travels along steel. A dropped tool can sound like a bell. As the ship grows, it begins to make its own acoustics, its own weather of sound. A man inside it can feel both enclosed and exposed, surrounded by metal, open to the sky, not yet afloat, not yet complete. A ship before launch is a place between worlds, not land, not sea, not alive, not dead, only becoming. The sea waits nearby. The sea is older than the yard, older than the war, older than the ship, older than the name Yamato. The sea does not hurry. It receives rivers. It receives rain. It receives ships. It receives wreckage. It receives reflections of dawn. It receives the ashes of empires without changing its nature. In Kura, the inland sea lies protected and quiet compared to the open Pacific. Islands break the horizon. Fishing boats move. Mist sometimes settles in low layers. The water carries ordinary traffic, naval traffic, workboats, supply vessels, and the silent expectation of ships that have not yet entered it. The sea watches the shipyard without judgment. The men build, the sea waits, warm enough, steady enough, known enough. The keel, the frames, the armour, the vast form of the battleship. Each stage makes the Yamato more real, but the ship remains hidden, covered from distant eyes, guarded, measured, official, controlled. This hiddenness gives the ship a strange double life. Inside the yard she is all work and difficulty. Outside she is rumour, a shape behind screens, a number not spoken, a name not yet widely known. A secret weight growing beside the sea. At night, after many workers have gone home, the shipyard changes. It does not sleep completely. No great shipyard sleeps entirely during urgent construction, but it quiets. The loud hammering fades. The cranes stand still. A few lamps remain. Guards walk. A late team finishes some necessary task. The hull becomes a dark mass against the darker sky. The smell of the yard changes too. Less hot metal, more cooling steel, damp air, oil, salt, ash, rope, wood. Paint drying slowly. Night gathers in the unfinished spaces. Inside the hull, a single lamp can make a whole compartment feel like a small room inside an enormous future. A worker carrying tools through such a space might hear water outside and imagine, for 1 second, the ship afloat. Not as an official image, only as sound, steel around him, sea beyond. One day, this body will move. One day, these compartments will hold men. One day, the lamps will be naval lamps, not shipyard lamps. One day, the hollow spaces will smell of oil, rice, salt, damp cloth, machine warmth, and the particular human smell of many men living in too little space. But not yet. Nothing unusual. Only an unfinished ship. Only steel. Only work. Only night. You do not need to remember every detail. You may drift in and out. Let the shipyard pass slowly. Cranes, lamps, hull, water. Cranes, lamps, hull, water. The same images returning softly like tide against stone. The Yamato was launched in 1940 and completed in 1941. Those are the dates history keeps, but dates compress human labour. A date says launched. A date says commissioned. A date says completed. But between those dates were mornings and evenings, rain and heat, mist and sweat, plans and corrections, meals eaten in a hurry, hands bandaged, arguments over fittings, inspections, delays, orders, calculations, 1,000 small decisions, 1,000 tired returns. No one aboard or near the ship was living inside history as it would later be written. They were living inside the present. The present asks for the next task. The next line, the next bolt, the next cup of tea, the next form, the next sound of a whistle, the next walk home in the dark. In one office near the yard, Kenji Morita continues working through an evening. The lamp is low, other desks are empty. Outside, the yard is quiet enough that the harbour can be heard. Water, a rope tapping, a distant footstep, a guard's voice. Kenji studies a drawing. There is a figure he does not like, not wrong exactly, only worth checking. He checks it, finds nothing, checks again, still nothing. His eyes ache. He removes his glasses and presses his fingers briefly to the bridge of his nose. Then he opens the notebook. The photograph is there. His wife, his daughter. The baby looks serious, as babies sometimes do, as if already disappointed by the quality of the world's explanations. Kenji smiles quietly, then closes the notebook before the smile becomes too much. He writes one more note beside the drawing. Recheck in morning. This is a form of wisdom. Some problems are not solved by exhaustion. Some lines need daylight. He covers the sheet, turns down the lamp, and leaves. Outside, the hull of the Yamato rises behind screens. Huge, dark, unfinished. A ship not yet living, but already heavy with meaning others will later place upon it. Kenji passes a guard, nods. The guard nods back. Nothing unusual, only a man going home, only a ship behind him, only the sea in the dark. As months pass, the Yamato takes on more of herself. Armour, decking, turrets, interior spaces, machinery, the immense guns for which she would become known. The details grow inside the scale. A giant ship is not only giant things, it is small things repeated thousands of times. Valves, ladders, switches, hooks, bolts, labels, lockers, handles, pipes, wires, stools, bunks, hooks for clothing, places for cups, places for tools, places for documents, places where men will stand when the ship moves, places where men will wait, places where men will be bored, places where men will be afraid, places where men will pretend not to be, places where men will sleep. The Yamato, before sailing, already contains possible lives. This is the untold part of the story, not the famous version, the quieter one. A battleship is remembered for armour and guns, for tonnage and fate. But it is also designed around human routine. Men must eat, men must wash, men must sleep, men must move through narrow passages, men must find air, men must carry orders, men must climb, men must sit, men must stand watch, men must store letters, men must keep photographs dry. A ship that forgets human routine becomes unlivable, no matter how powerful it is. So the Yamato is built not only as a weapon, but as a floating city of compartments. A city with steel walls, a city with engines for a heart, a city with guns for history. A city with kitchens, bunks, officers' rooms, wash spaces, medical spaces, repair spaces, storage spaces, and long interior passages where a man can lose his sense of weather. The sea waits outside, the shipyard builds inside. The men continue. He cleaned, he ate, he slept, he returned, he measured, he lifted, he waited, he checked. Enough. That word belongs in a shipyard too. The plate is warm enough to work. The light is steady enough to see. The ladder is safe enough to climb. The tea is hot enough to hold. The figure is clear enough to pass. The day is done enough to leave. Enough is not perfect. Enough is how human beings continue. By the time the Yamato is closer to completion, the shipyard workers know parts of her as one knows a neighbourhood. A corner where the wind catches. A passage that echoes oddly. A ladder that feels steeper than it looks. A space where a lamp always seems too dim. A place where tools vanish if set down carelessly. A view from a high platform where the harbour appears suddenly wide. Sato knows where to stand when a crane moves a certain load. Haru knows which older worker will lend him a tool without a lecture, and which will lend it with 2 lectures. Kenji knows which plans have been revised so often that the paper itself seems tired. A guard knows the hour when mist usually comes over the yard. A cook knows how long rice must be held before the midday rush. The ship grows through these ordinary knowledges, not through legend, through routine, through repetition, through hands. Then comes the launching. History can make launching sound like a single event, a ship entering water, a ceremony, a moment. But even a launch is built from preparation, checks, lines, orders, weather, timing, men at posts, eyes on signals. A large ship does not simply decide to meet the sea, it must be guided, released, watched. The Yamato, massive and guarded by secrecy, moved toward the water as the result of countless decisions made before the public moment. The sea that had waited now received the hull. Not with applause, the sea does not applaud. The sea rises, shifts, accepts weight, changes around the new object. The Yamato entered the water and the water held her. That is all a ship ever asks at first. Hold me, carry me, do not yet test me. For a little while the great battleship was not doomed. It was new, large, incomplete in spirit even if the hull floated, still needing work, still needing systems, crew, testing, habit, familiarity. A ship is not fully born when it touches water. It becomes herself slowly, through trials, through corrections, through the first men learning her sounds, through the engines being listened to, through doors opened and closed, through watches stood, through meals served, through the first night aboard when a sailor hears the hull around him and realizes the ship has a voice. But we are not there yet, not fully, for now the Yamato rests in the harbour after construction. The shipyard remains behind her. The workers continue with other tasks. The sea moves under her. The name begins to gather weight. Yamato, ancient name, national name, ship name. History will later speak it with solemnity. But at Curie, in those hours, it is also written on papers, spoken by officers, noted by workers, handled by clerks, part of schedules, part of maintenance, part of secrecy, part of routine. Nothing unusual, only a new great ship entering the long machinery of naval life. If you are still following the story, you do not need to hold every detail. Let the facts pass gently, like landmarks seen through fog. Cure, shipyard, steel, salt, lamps, drafting tables, hidden screens, workers, cranes, hull, water, Yamato. The first phase of the story can rest here. Not at sea yet, not in her final mission, not in the famous ending, only at the beginning. A ship built in secrecy, a ship made by hands, a ship not yet a legend, a ship still smelling of new paint, oil, hot metal, damp rope, wood, salt, and work. The men leave the yard at evening. The lamps turn low, the cranes stand still, the harbour darkens, the sea moves quietly against the new hull. Somewhere, Kenji Morita walks home with rolled papers under his arm and his daughter's photograph in his notebook. Somewhere, Sato washes metal dust from his hands. Somewhere, Haru cleans the small cut on his palm. Somewhere, a guard watches the screens move slightly in the night wind. And beyond them all, the Yamato rests. Large enough to seem impossible, still enough to seem peaceful, known enough to those who built her, unknown enough to the world outside. The sea is calm, the harbour is dark, the shipyard is quiet, the name has begun, Yamato, not yet doomed in the minds of the men who shaped her, not yet remembered as a wreck, not yet the final image, only steel at rest, only water beneath, only a great ship at the edge of her own long story. The Yamato did not become a legend the day she touched the water. A ship does not become herself all at once. Not even a ship as large as Yamato. First, she had to be learned. By officers, by engineers, by cooks, by signalmen, by gunners, by clerks, by lookouts, by mechanics, by men who had never before served on anything so large. A ship, when new, is a place full of questions. Where does this passage lead? Which ladder is fastest? Which hatch sticks? Which compartment smells of paint longer than the others? Which bulkhead sweats in humid weather? Which corner of the mess is warmest? Which pipe knocks softly when the engines settle? Which sleeping space is least disturbed by footsteps? Which officer wants reports folded exactly? which cook adds too much salt, which door should never be left unsecured, which deck is slippery after rain, which sound means nothing unusual, which sound means someone should get up at once. The men of the Yamato learned these things slowly, not from diagrams alone, from walking, touching, waiting, bumping a shoulder in a narrow place, carrying a bowl of rice through a passage that turned more sharply than expected, taking the wrong ladder and arriving somewhere one deck too low, hearing the engines through steel, feeling the ship move underfoot, learning where air was fresh enough, where heat gathered, where voices echoed, where a man could stand for one quiet breath before duty found him again. This is the untold part of the story, not the famous version, the quieter one. The Yamato is a place. The Yamato is a floating city. The Yamato is steel arranged around human routine. By the time she entered service in December 1941, the ship was no longer only a secret in the yard. She had a crew, a pulse, a schedule, a smell, 1,000 habits beginning to form inside her. History would later speak of displacement, armour, guns, speed, strategy, and fate. Those things matter. But no man aboard lived inside a statistic. He lived inside a compartment, a bunk, a mess line, a watch schedule, a hot engine space, a narrow passage, a letter from home, a pair of boots that never dried quickly enough, a cup that belonged to him because he had used it long enough, a small photograph wrapped in cloth, a blanket folded at the end of a sleeping space, a pencil stub, a towel, a packet of cigarettes, a lucky charm, a spoon, a little object that said, quietly, "This is mine, even here." The Yamato carried thousands of men. Numbers vary by period and mission, but in her life she was home to a vast crew, and in her final days roughly 2,700 men were aboard. But numbers can become too large to feel. So imagine one man, then another, a cook rinsing a pot, an engineer wiping sweat from his neck, a lookout blinking into wind, a young sailor folding a blanket with more care than he shows in conversation, a signalman checking flags, a clerk writing a name, a gun crewman cleaning metal he may never truly understand as separate from his own fate, a medic counting supplies, a petty officer inspecting a passage, a man in a quiet corner reading the same letter for the third time, a man who has learned to sleep through machinery, a man who cannot, a man who writes home cheerfully, a man who writes nothing because cheerfulness feels false and truth feels too heavy. The ship smelled of oil, paint, rice, salt, damp cloth, machine warmth, and the particular human smell of many men living in too little space. It smelled different in different places. Near the mess it was rice, soup, tea, steam, metal bowls, damp sleeves, and tired appetite. Near the engine spaces it was oil, heat, grease, metal, sweat, and warm air pushed through ventilation. Near the upper decks it was salt, paint, rope, rain, sun-warmed steel, and wind. Near the sleeping spaces it was blankets, bodies, damp cloth, tobacco, leather, soap, and the stale closeness of men who had slept badly but slept anyway. Near the chart room it was paper, ink, wood, lamp heat, and the faint dryness of maps kept away from spray. Near the medical spaces it was bandage cloth, antiseptic, stored metal instruments, clean water, and the quiet discipline of readiness. A great ship is many smells held together by steel. It is also many temperatures. Warm near machinery, cooler near the outer skin at night, humid below, wind cut above, too hot in some passages, too cold in others after rain, comfortable almost nowhere for long, enough perhaps, warm enough, dry enough, quiet enough for a few minutes, known enough to sleep. The men did not need perfection. Ships do not offer perfection. They offer routine. Routine becomes comfort when a man is far from home. Morning aboard Yamato did not begin the same for everyone. Some men woke because their watch ended, some because their watch began, some because a superior's voice entered the compartment, some because footsteps passed too close, some because the ship changed sound, some because they had slept lightly all night, never fully trusting the metal world around them. The sleeping areas were crowded, not always chaotic, but close. A man learned to fold himself into space, to keep his belongings contained, to sleep with noise, to wake without complaint when another man needed to pass, to identify people by the sound of their movements, a cough, a boot, a muttered phrase, a way of climbing down, a way of folding cloth. Men carried their home habits into the ship and slowly had them reshaped by steel. One sailor, whom we will call Taro Nishimura, kept a small cloth packet tied with string beneath his folded blanket. Inside was a photograph of his parents, a temple charm, and a pressed leaf from a place near his childhood home. He did not show the packet often, not because it was secret, because some things lose shape if handled too publicly. Taro was 19. He had a narrow face, serious eyes, and a habit of polishing small metal pieces longer than required. Older sailors noticed this and made comments, not cruel ones. Only ship comments, the kind men use when affection has nowhere formal to go. "You will polish through to the other side," one man said. Taro answered, "Then it will be lighter." That made the older men laugh, and laughter gave him a place among them. On a ship, belonging begins with being teased in a way that does not wound. Taro learned the passages slowly. The Yamato's interior could feel endless to a new man. Ladders, hatches, turns, bulkheads, compartments. A corridor that seemed familiar until it opened into the wrong place. He learned to follow sounds, voices near the mess, a pump, the low vibration of machinery, the change in air near a ladder, the smell of cooking, the sharp scent of fresh paint, the sound of boots above. The ship taught him by repetition. Wrong way, try again, mind the step, duck here, hold the rail, keep moving. Nothing unusual, just the education of a young sailor inside a very large ship. In the mess, men sat close. Meals aboard warships are never only meals, they are time markers. Morning rice, soup, tea, fish when available, pickled vegetables, small comforts, small disappointments, food eaten quickly before watch, food eaten slowly when the schedule allowed, food that tasted better because a man was hungry, food that tasted of nothing because a man was tired. Bowls moved, chopsticks clicked, voices rose and fell. A man complained softly about the rice. Another told him to complain louder so the rice might be ashamed and improve. A third man said rice had more discipline than sailors and should not be insulted. This was life aboard. Not grand, not famous, human. The men cleaned, they ate, they slept, they waited, they stood watch, they returned, they cleaned again. The mess smelled of steam, rice, tea, fish, soy, metal, damp cloth, and many men trying to become warm enough before returning to duty. A cup could become precious there, not because it was fine, because it was familiar. A small chipped cup, a metal cup, a cup with a mark near the rim, a cup that held tea too hot at first and then exactly right for 3 breaths before becoming ordinary. A man could wrap both hands around it and feel, briefly, that something in the world was simple. Heat, hands, drink, pause, enough. If you are still following the story, you do not need to hold every detail. You may drift in and out. Let the ship become a slow set of rooms, mess room, sleeping space, engine room, chart room, signal bridge, deck, passage, mess room again. The same spaces returning like a tide. The engine spaces were another world, deeper, hotter, less forgiving. Men there learned the language of machinery not as theory, but as survival. A change in vibration, a smell, a rhythm, a knock, a pressure reading, a warmth where warmth should not be. A small irregularity that might mean nothing. A small irregularity that might mean everything. Engineers and stokers worked inside heat that seemed to come from every direction. From machinery, from pipes, from the enclosed air, from the ship's own effort. Their clothing clung. Hands grew dark with oil. Faces shone. A man wiped his forehead and left a streak across his skin. Another leaned close to hear a sound beneath a greater sound. Another checked a gauge, tapped it once, then checked again because trust aboard ship is practical, not sentimental. The engines gave the Yamato a heartbeat. A heavy one. Deep, steady. Felt through decks and soles. A man sleeping above might not notice it after weeks aboard, until it changed or stopped. Then the absence itself would wake him. Machinery becomes part of the body when one lives with it long enough. The ship breathes through vents, pulses through shafts, murmurs through pipes, rattles softly in corners, ticks as metal changes temperature, complains in weather, settles at anchor, answers the sea. An engineer named Ito had worked on smaller vessels before Yamato. He was in his 30s, compact, calm, and rarely impressed. He did not speak loudly because the engine spaces were loud enough. You had to lean closer to hear him, and because men leaned closer, they listened better. Ito carried a rag tucked into his belt and a pencil behind one ear. The pencil was never sharp enough. He complained about this often, but never replaced it until it was almost too small to hold. Ito believed machines told the truth more often than men. Not because machines were noble, because machines did not bother pretending. If something was misaligned, it showed in vibration. If oil was wrong, it showed in heat. If pressure shifted, the gauge knew before pride did. Ito trusted gauges. He trusted experienced ears. He trusted men who cleaned tools without being told. He did not trust men who said probably too often. In his small notebook he wrote practical notes. Valve checked. Heat steady. Sound near pump to watch. Nothing unusual. That phrase appeared often. Nothing unusual. It was one of the most comforting phrases aboard. Nothing unusual meant the ship was still herself. The engine room was hot. The mess was crowded. The watch was long. The sea was grey. The night was damp. Nothing unusual. In a world of war, nothing unusual could feel like a blessing. High above, the watchkeepers saw another Yamato. The ship as deck, wind, horizon, weather, signal flags, and sea. At night, the upper decks belonged to darkness and duty. A man on watch stood with coat fastened, hands sometimes cold, eyes trained outward. He watched for shapes, lights, wakes, weather, aircraft, ships, signals, anything, everything. Mostly he watched the sea. The sea is patient with watchers. It offers motion without explanation. Dark water, grey water, morning water, water under moonlight, water under rain, water with small waves, water with long swells, water that seems empty until it is not, water that carries sound strangely, water that reflects the sky while hiding its own depth. The sea is not cruel. The sea is not kind. The sea is older than both words. It was there before the Yamato was imagined. It was there when the keel was laid. It was there when the ship entered the water. It would be there after the final day. To men aboard, the sea could be road, wall, mirror, threat, companion, and silence. Sometimes all in the same hour. A lookout named Masao stood many night watches. He was older than Taro by only a few years, but aboard ship, years of confidence can look like age. Masao knew how to stand without wasting strength. Feet set, shoulders easy, eyes moving, not staring too hard at one point, not letting attention blur. He once told Taro that looking at the sea was like listening to a quiet man. If you try to force meaning from it, he said, you hear yourself instead. Taro did not understand. Then, after enough watches, he did. At midnight, the Yamato changed again. Daytime routines faded. The ship narrowed into lamps, watch stations, engine vibration, and small pools of human wakefulness. Most men slept, or tried to. Some turned in their bunks. Some dreamed. Some lay awake, listening to the ship. Some wrote letters when the light allowed. Some sat with a cup, some stood watch. Some worked below where machinery did not care that it was night. Midnight on the Yamato was not silent. It was layered. The deep engine sound, water along the hull, a footstep in a passage, a low voice, a hatch closing carefully, a pipe ticking, a lamp humming, a man coughing once, a distant clang softened by steel. The ship did not sleep. It only lowered its voice. This is why the title of tonight's journey belongs to midnight. Midnight on the Yamato. Not because everything happened then, but because midnight reveals the hidden life of a ship. The famous story waits elsewhere. The quiet one lives here, in the hours when men are half asleep, when the sea is dark, when the ship's size becomes less visible but more felt, when a sailor touches a photograph before folding it away, when an engineer checks a gauge under low light, when a cook rinses a pot for morning, when a watchkeeper looks out and sees nothing unusual, when the whole ship seems to move through time as much as through water. You do not need to remember every passage. You may let the ship pass around you. Let the Yamato become a slow interior, a corridor of steel, a warm mess room, a deep engine space, a chart table under a lamp, a deck under stars, a bunk with a folded blanket, a cup held in both hands, a photograph hidden in cloth. Enough. The chart room had its own kind of quiet. not the quiet of sleep, the quiet of attention. Charts spread on a table, dividers, pencils, rulers, lamps shaded carefully, officers and navigation staff reading the sea as lines and numbers, position, course, distance, depth, weather, time. The sea outside was vast, but on the chart it became paper. Coastlines, depth markings, routes, small written figures. Human beings need maps because the world is too large to hold all at once. But every map is also a simplification. A line across water looks clean. The ship travelling it does not. Wind intervenes. Orders intervene. Fuel, visibility, mechanical limits, human fatigue, enemy movement, command decisions, weather, chance. The chart gives a path. The sea gives the conditions. No one aboard was living inside history as it would later be written. They were living inside the present. A present measured in position reports, meal times, watch rotations, maintenance, orders, weather, and waiting. In the chart room, an officer might stand with both hands on the table, studying a line drawn toward a place not yet seen. Another man writes the time. Another checks a figure. Another listens for a report. The lamp throws shadows across the paper. Outside the room, the ship moves. Inside, the sea becomes calculation. Nothing unusual, only men trying to know where they are. Aboard Yamato, hierarchy-shaped life. Officers' spaces, crew spaces, orders moving downward, reports moving upward, forms of speech, forms of posture, forms of waiting. But beneath hierarchy, the ship made everyone dependent. A great vessel cannot move because one rank wills it. It moves because cooks cook, engineers maintain, lookouts watch, signalmen signal, cleaners clean, clerks write, gunners train, medics prepare, officers decide, and thousands of ordinary tasks continue. He cleaned, he ate, he slept, he waited, he reported, he checked, he carried, he watched. The repetition was not empty, it was the ship's life. A young sailor might resent cleaning a passage that would be dirty again by evening. An older man might say, "Clean it anyway." Not because cleanliness is decoration, because cleaning makes a man see. A loose fitting, a leak, a crack, a misplaced object. A stain that should not be there, a deck too slippery. Routine reveals what drama misses. The Yamato's daily life was full of such seeing. The small things that kept the great ship functioning. A towel hung where it should dry, a pipe checked, a hatch secured, a boot moved from a passage, a bowl stacked, a lamp trimmed, a report filed, a tool returned, a bunk folded. Nothing unusual. Nothing unusual. The phrase repeats because ship life repeats. The repetition is part of sleep. It is also part of truth. Between duties, men spoke of home, not always directly. Home can be too sharp a subject if handled carelessly. They spoke around it. A town's weather, a mother's cooking, a younger brother's foolishness, a wife's handwriting, a child's new word, a field, a street, a train station, a festival, a temple bell, a river, a mountain road. Someone mentioned a village near snow. Someone mentioned summer insects. Someone mentioned a shop where sweets had once been cheap and now were not. Someone said his father would complain about the ship's tea. Another man said fathers complain because they fear silence more. That ended the conversation for a while. Private things appeared in fragments. A man did not always say, "I miss home." He said, "The rice was different where I grew up." He did not say, "I am afraid." He said, "The sea is too quiet tonight." He did not say, "I hope I live." He said, "I should write tomorrow." The Yamato held these indirect sentences. Steel can carry many kinds of weight. Letters aboard ship were written in corners, at tables, on bunks, beside lamps, whenever time and privacy could be found. A sailor named Kobayashi wrote to his sister using a pencil so short he had to hold it carefully. He described the ship only in permitted ways, large, busy, difficult. He did not describe what secrecy forbade. He did not describe what would worry her. He wrote that he was eating well enough, sleeping enough, working enough, 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 enough. The word did more work than he knew. He told her to help their mother with the winter repairs. He told her not to let the roof leak worsen. He told her to keep his old books dry. Then he stopped. There was more to say. There is always more to say. He looked at the pencil, looked at the paper, looked at the lamp, then wrote only, "I remember the sound of rain on our roof." That was the true sentence. He folded the letter. A letter aboard a battleship is a small boat. It carries what can be carried. Not the whole heart. Only enough. A senior petty officer might inspect the sleeping spaces after lights were lowered. He walks slowly, not to disturb, to know. A blanket half fallen, a man restless, a leak near a pipe, a lamp too bright, a passage blocked, a smell that should be checked. Men in charge of small spaces learn the moral value of noticing, not grand command, small command. The kind that says, move that, check that, sleep while you can, eat now, clean this, write clearly. Do not leave your boots there, nothing unusual. And when something is unusual, act before it becomes larger. The Yamato's crew lived within a strange contradiction. They served aboard one of the most powerful battleships ever made, and most of their hours were ordinary. This is true of many instruments of war. History remembers their decisive moments. The people inside remember waiting, maintenance, food, heat, boredom, training, cleaning, inspection, the slow passage of days. The ship's great guns were there, enormous and famous, but a sailor could pass days thinking more about laundry, watch schedules and sleep than about naval destiny. This does not make the ship smaller. It makes the men real. But this is the untold part of the story, not the famous version, the quieter one. A battleship's power may be measured in guns and armour. Its life is measured in meals, watches, repairs, letters and sleep. The great main turrets were unlike anything most men had ever seen. Massive, purposeful, heavy with design. Inside and around them, crews trained, maintained, learned sequences, checked mechanisms, followed orders, repeated procedures. The work around such guns could become almost ritual. Clean, inspect, prepare, check, secure, report. Men do not need to glorify a weapon to become skilled around it. Skill is often quieter than belief. A man can learn the steps because steps must be learned, because others depend on him, because error can harm men near him before it ever touches an enemy, because discipline is sometimes simply care under another name. On deck, under open sky, the Yamato could seem almost calm when weather was gentle. Grey steel, wide surfaces, wind over railings, the great guns silent, the sea moving past, men crossing from one duty to another, a flag shifting, a gull far behind in harbour. At sunset the ship could take the light along her edges and appear still, solemn, almost peaceful. But inside she remained busy. The mess. The engines, the passages, the watch, the paperwork, the breathing of thousands, large outside, crowded inside, silent outside, noisy inside, legend outside, routine inside. This contrast belongs to the story. When Yamato was in harbour, there were other rhythms, supplies, inspections, repairs, training, liberty for some, restrictions for others, the smell of land reaching the ship, harbour water against the hull, small boats coming alongside, men looking towards shore with complicated expressions. A harbour can comfort and torment at once. Land is near, home is not. A man can see lights and still be far away. In harbour, Taro sometimes stood where he could see the hills. He did not speak much when looking. Masao, the older lookout, once stood beside him. "Thinking of home," Masao said. It was not a question. Taro answered, "Thinking of trees." Masao nodded as if this made complete sense. On a ship, trees can become exotic. Soil, leaves, dust roads, a gate, a field. The smell of cooking from a house. Things once ordinary become almost dreamlike after enough time surrounded by steel and water. Taro asked, "Do you get used to it?" "To the ship?" Masao looked at the deck. "You get used to parts of it." "Which parts?" "The parts that repeat. And the rest. The rest waits." Taro did not understand then. Later he would. Aboard Yamato, repetition made the ship livable, but the larger reality always waited around it. The war, the Pacific, orders, losses elsewhere, changes in strategy, rumours, silences, news that came late, news that came incomplete. Men heard things, men guessed things, men learned not to say every guess aloud. By 1944, and then 1945, the situation around Japan had changed deeply. But in the daily life of a ship, even large changes entered through small channels. A new order, a tighter restriction, a different tone in an officer's voice, a missing ship not mentioned in the usual way, fuel concerns, air threat training adjusted, letters delayed, food changed, more maintenance, more waiting. The Yamato remained powerful, but power does not erase uncertainty. A man can stand on a giant battleship and still feel the world narrowing. This feeling did not arrive all at once, it gathered like weather. A conversation stopped when someone entered. A report read quietly, a glance between officers, a sailor noticing that jokes had grown shorter, a cook stretching supplies more carefully, an engineer listening longer to machinery because repair parts were not always easy, a man on watch staring at the sky more often. The ship continued. Nothing unusual, but the meaning of nothing unusual shifted. Earlier, it meant routine. Later, it could mean only that uncertainty had not yet become visible. If you're still awake, you do not need to keep every year in order. Let the dates pass softly. 1941, 1942, 1943, 1944, early 1945. A great ship moving through a war that changed around her. A crew living day by day inside steel. A sea older than every plane. The Yamato's life aboard was never only one mood. There was discipline, boredom, pride, fatigue, irritation, humour, homesickness, fear, routine. Men complained, men laughed, men worked, men repeated orders, men found tiny comforts where they could. A better cup of tea, a dry blanket, a letter received, a breeze on deck, a quiet watch with nothing unusual, a bowl of rice warm enough, a lamp steady enough, a passage known enough in the dark. Enough. Enough is a powerful word aboard ship. In a small corner near a passage, one sailor kept a pencil mark on the inside of a locker door. Not a forbidden mark, only a tiny line he made after each letter received from home. 3 lines, then 4, then none for a long time. He did not erase them. A mark can become a calendar when official dates do not help. Another man kept a photograph tucked behind a folded cloth. Another kept a smooth stone from a river. Another kept a strip of fabric. Another kept nothing visible, but touched the inside of his sleeve when thinking of home. Personal objects aboard a warship are small acts of resistance against becoming only a function. A man may be assigned a duty. He may wear a uniform. He may follow orders. But his cup, his photograph, his blanket fold, his pencil, his charm, his boots by the bunk, remind him that he is also himself. This is why we name the objects. Cup, blanket, lamp, pencil, photo, boots, rice bowl, towel, notebook, charm, string. The objects are small. The ship is large. Both are true. At night, when the ship moved through dark water, the objects became more important. A lamp swinging slightly. A cup set carefully so it would not slide. A blanket pulled closer. A photograph returned to cloth. Boots placed where feet could find them quickly. A pencil tucked into a notebook before sleep. The ship moved. The sea moved. Men tried to sleep within motion. Some nights were calm enough, some nights were not. When the sea was gentle, water brushed the hull with a sound almost like breath. When weather rose, the ship answered in deeper tones. Steel flexed, objects shifted, men slept lighter. The sea reminded everyone that no matter how large Yamato was, she was still a ship. And a ship is always a guest on water. The sea does not care about tonnage. It holds what floats. It takes what sinks. It moves beneath everything. This is the untold part of the story, not the famous version, the quieter one. The sea and the men, the ship and the routine, the waiting before the final order. In the navigation spaces, officers marked positions. In the engine rooms, Ito and men like him listened. In the mess, Taro and others ate. On watch, Masao looked outward. In sleeping spaces, men dreamed of places without steel walls. In the medical area, supplies were counted. In offices, papers moved. In storage spaces, rice, tools, equipment, spare parts, cloth, and small necessities waited for use. The ship was huge because war had imagined huge answers, but daily life aboard remained made of small needs: food, water, air, sleep, light, heat, cleanliness, clarity, order, companionship, silence when possible, news when allowed, Hope when it could be held safely. A great ship carries human smallness inside it. That is not weakness, it is truth. By early 1945, the Yamato's world had grown heavier. The war had moved closer to Japan. Fuel was precious. Air power had changed the meaning of surface ships. Many men understood more than they said. Some sensed the age of great battleships was passing. Some did not think in such terms. They thought of the next watch, the next meal, the next maintenance task, the next order, the next letter. No one aboard was living inside history as it would later be written. They were living inside the present. And the present, even near the end of a war, still contains ordinary hours. A man cleaning boots. A man complaining about soup. A man sleeping with one arm over his eyes. A man reading a letter. A man retying a bundle. A man looking at the sea. A man hearing nothing unusual and feeling grateful. The Yamato held all of this. Power and waiting. Steel and cloth. Orders and jokes. Machinery and sleep. Empire and homesickness. The enormous and the private. At midnight the ship could seem almost timeless. Dark sea outside. Lamps inside. Engines low. Passages quiet. A watchkeeper shifting his weight. An engineer bending over a gauge. A cook preparing for morning. A young sailor awake in his bunk listening to the ship breathe. Midnight on the Yamato. The name moves softly now, not as an explosion, not as a headline, as a ship in the dark, a ship full of men, a ship still moving through ordinary hours before the final voyage. If you are drifting now, that is enough. You can let the rooms pass one by one. The mess fades, the engine room fades. The chart room fades, the sleeping space fades. The deck fades, the sea remains, dark, patient, ancient. The ship moves across it, the men continue, they cleaned, they ate, they slept, they waited, they watched, they wrote, they returned to duty. Nothing unusual, nothing unusual. For now, the Yamato is not yet on her last mission. For now, she is still a world of steel and breath. A floating city under orders not yet final. A place where men live inside routine because routine is what they have. The ship smells of oil, paint, rice, salt, damp cloth, machine warmth, and many lives held close together. The lamps are low, the engines are steady, the sea is dark, the watch is set, the cups are stored, the blankets are folded, the photographs are hidden, the pencils are tucked away, the boots wait beside bunks, and somewhere deep inside the ship, a man hears the machinery continue and thinks, for a moment, that this sound is enough to sleep by, warm enough, steady enough, known enough. The Yamato moves through the night. The sea receives her weight. The men breathe within her, and the famous final story waits beyond the next horizon. By the spring of 1945, the Yamato was no longer only a great battleship moving through ordinary naval routine. She was still steel, still machinery, still passages, mess spaces, sleeping quarters, watch stations, chart rooms, engine rooms, and lamps. She was still cups, blankets, boots, pencils, photographs, rice bowls, towels, oil rags, valves, ladders, and the steady breath of men living inside metal. But the world around her had changed. The war had moved closer to Japan. The sea routes had grown more dangerous. The sky had become more dangerous than the horizon. Fuel was harder to spare. Ships that had once seemed like the centre of naval power now moved beneath a different kind of threat. Aircraft could cross distance quickly. Aircraft could find ships on open water. Aircraft could make even the largest vessels seem exposed. The age of the great battleship was not gone in the minds of all men. But it was being questioned by the sea, by the sky, by loss, by distance, and by the hard arithmetic of war. No one aboard the Yamato needed a historian to explain that things had changed. They felt it in routine, in orders, in shortages, in delays, in the tone of officers, in the way conversation stopped when certain subjects came too close, in the way the ship, enormous as she was, seemed sometimes to be waiting for a purpose large enough to match her size. The final purpose came in April 1945, Operation Tengo, a mission toward Okinawa, a mission that would send Yamato and her escorting ships south, across waters watched by American air power, toward a battle already unfolding far away. History would later describe it plainly, a final sortie, a mission with little chance of return, a doomed voyage. But no man aboard woke up inside a phrase like that. No one opened his eyes and thought, I am now part of a doomed battleship. They woke into compartments, into heat, into orders, into the smell of rice and oil, into another morning aboard a ship whose future had narrowed. They woke into the present, and the present, even when fate is near, arrives one task at a time. A man is told to report, a man folds a blanket, a man checks a valve, a man cleans a surface already clean enough, a man writes a letter, a man looks at a photograph, a man ties his boots, a man says nothing unusual because saying more would make the room too heavy. The Yamato prepared, not with spectacle, with work. Work is how ships approach history. Men moved through the passages carrying tools, messages, parts, folded cloth, ammunition details, orders, lists, and private worry hidden under ordinary faces. The mess continued. The engines required attention. The chart room required numbers. The signal spaces required readiness. The medical spaces required supplies. The deck required inspection. The ship required everything. Great events are often held together by small tasks performed by tired men. This is the untold part of the story, not the famous version, the quieter one. The mission that would later be remembered for its ending began with preparations that looked almost ordinary from a distance. A cup placed down, a locker opened, a cloth bundle tied, a letter folded, a boot pulled on, a watch checked, a hatch closed, a name entered, an officer stepping into a room with new instructions, a sailor hearing the instructions and lowering his eyes for one breath before answering. Yes. The order moved through the ship, not as one single wave, as many smaller waves. Officers first, then divisions, then petty officers, then men. The news changed shape as it travelled. Official at the top, practical in the middle, personal at the bottom. In the chart room, the route toward Okinawa became a line on paper. A line can be drawn quietly. A pencil can move over a chart without sound enough to disturb a sleeping man in another compartment. But a line on paper can carry thousands of lives. Position, course, speed, fuel, distance, enemy airfields, expected waters, times, reports. The sea outside remained old and indifferent. On the chart, the sea became space to be crossed. The chart room smelled of paper, ink, lamp heat, wood, damp cloth, and the faint trace of tobacco that clung to coats even when no one smoked. A navigator bent over the table. Another officer stood beside him. A pencil mark was made, a time written, a measurement checked. The line moved south. Okinawa was not only a name then, it was a place of battle, a place of men already fighting, a place toward which the Yamato would sail with a mission whose logic belonged to war, command, desperation, and sacrifice. But inside the chart room the line was just a line, straight enough, clear enough, known enough. The map did not show fear. Maps rarely do. Maps show coastlines, depths, bearings, distances, positions. They do not show a sailor touching the photograph inside his shirt. They do not show an engineer listening longer than usual to the machinery, because he knows the ship may be asked to go farther than return allows. They do not show a cook measuring rice with the seriousness of a priest. They do not show a young man trying to write home without saying goodbye. Maps make voyages look cleaner than they are. The Yamato's final voyage was not clean. It was human. In the sleeping spaces, men prepared in different ways. Some made jokes, short ones, dry ones, the kind that do not ask to be answered. Some grew quiet, some became more careful with their belongings. A blanket folded too neatly, a cup washed and placed where it belonged, a photograph looked at, then wrapped again, a charm tucked deeper into cloth, a letter started, abandoned, started again. A man sitting on the edge of his bunk with both hands resting on his knees. Nothing unusual, only the body preparing before the mind has found words. Taro Nishimura, the young sailor with the cloth packet, opened his locker and looked at the few things inside. Not much. No sailor had much private space aboard a warship. A folded garment, a towel, a cup, a small writing set, a cloth packet, a spare pair of socks, a letter from home, opened many times. He took out the cloth packet and untied it. Inside, the photograph of his parents had softened at the edges. The temple charm remained intact. The pressed leaf had become fragile, too fragile to touch directly. He looked at it for only a few seconds. The leaf had once been green. Now it was brown, flattened, delicate. A piece of land carried into a world of steel and water. He did not know why he had kept it so carefully. Perhaps because no one ordered him to. That was enough. Some objects matter because they belong to no one's duty. He wrapped the packet again, slowly, tied the string, placed it inside his clothing, not back in the locker. Masao, the lookout who had taught him how to listen to the sea, saw the movement but said nothing. After a moment, Masao said, "Check your boots." Taro looked down. "They are checked." "Check them again." So he did. This was care, not sentimental, practical. On a final voyage, care often wears the face of instruction. Check your boots. Eat now. Sleep if you can. Write clearly. Tie that tighter. Drink water. Keep your hands warm. Do not stand in the passage. Nothing unusual. Only men caring in the few languages allowed to them. In the engine spaces, Ito and the other engineers worked with a calm that had weight beneath it. Machinery did not become symbolic because the mission was final. Machinery remained machinery. Oil still had to be right. Heat still had to be watched. Pressure still had to be read. Vibration still had to be understood. A valve did not care about destiny. A pump did not respond to patriotic language. A bearing did not remain sound because men wished it so. The engines required competence, so Ito gave them competence. He checked. He listened. He wiped. He wrote. He leaned close to a gauge. He frowned. He checked again. Nothing unusual. That phrase appeared in his notes more than once. But by now, nothing unusual meant something different. It meant the machinery was ready. It meant the ship could move. It meant the voyage could happen. The same words that once comforted now carried weight. Nothing unusual. The engines will answer. The ship can go. The sea is waiting. In the mess, food was prepared. Men still needed to eat. This fact can feel almost strange near the end of a story, but bodies do not stop needing food because history approaches. Rice was served, soup, tea, small portions, whatever could be given. The mess smelled of steam, rice, salt, warm metal, damp cloth, and human closeness. Men ate quietly, some quickly, some slowly, a few with appetite, many without. A cook moved among the pots with a face that seemed stern enough to hold the room together. He had no speech to give. He gave food. Food is one of the oldest forms of courage. A bowl placed in front of a man, a cup filled, a hand saying, "Take this, because the next hour is not yet here." Kobayashi, the sailor with the short pencil, sat near the edge of the mess with a half-written letter folded in his pocket. He had tried to write earlier. "Dear sister, the weather is changing, and I hope the roof has been repaired." That was all he had managed. The roof. Again. The ordinary image would not leave him. A roof at home, rain on tiles, his sister carrying water, his mother complaining that men built things badly unless watched. He wanted to say, "I am going somewhere." He wanted to say, "Do not wait for details." He wanted to say, "I remember the rain." Instead, he had written about the roof. Maybe that was enough. A roof means home. Rain means memory. Repair means hope. Letters can carry more than they say. He ate half his rice and pushed the bowl slightly away. The man beside him pushed it back. "Eat." "I am not hungry." "Eat anyway." He ate. Nothing unusual. Only a man being kept alive by another man's insistence. If you are still following the story, you do not need to hold every detail. Let the facts pass gently, like landmarks seen through fog. April 1945, Operation Tengo, Yamato, Okinawa, a final mission, a ship preparing, men eating, men writing, men checking boots, men listening to machinery. You may drift, you may return when a detail calls you back. The story will keep moving slowly. The Yamato departed from the inland sea on April 6, 1945. That is the date history keeps. But departure was not only a date, it was a change in sound. Harbour sound becoming sea sound. Lines handled, orders passed, engines deepening, water moving differently along the hull, escorts forming, men at stations, men below, men above. The ship leaving the relative shelter of familiar waters. The inland sea had its own character, island shapes, narrow passages, protected water, fishing boats in other times, mist in the morning, coastlines close enough to make a man think of land even when he stood on steel. As Yamato moved, the land did not vanish at once. It withdrew. Hills shifted position. Harbour structures fell behind. Shore became line. Line became shadow. Shadow became memory. For men who watched from deck, the departure may have felt quiet in a way that made it heavier. No great music. No glorious certainty. Only engines, water, orders, wind. A coastline becoming less distinct. A man can leave a harbour many times, but some departures announce themselves inside the body. Taro stood where he was assigned, not free to simply watch. But when he could, he looked toward land. A low line, grey-green, fading. Masao stood near him for a moment. "Do not stare too hard," Masao said. "Why?" "It does not bring it closer." Taro lowered his eyes. Masao looked out too, for longer than his own advice allowed. No one corrected him. The sea opened. The Yamato moved south. The engines continued. In the engine spaces, the departure was felt as work. More vibration, more heat, more attention. The ship's motion passed through the body differently underway. At anchor, a ship has sounds of waiting. Underway, she has sounds of intention. Ito listened. The engines were steady, heavy, powerful, familiar enough. He wrote notes, nothing unusual. He wiped sweat from his jaw. A younger engineer asked whether he thought the sea would be rough. Ito looked at the gauge. The sea will be the sea. This was not wisdom. It was all he could honestly say. The sea would be the sea. Vast, indifferent, older than mission orders, older than flags, older than the Yamato. It would receive the ship's movement as it received all movement, without promise. The first hours of the voyage passed through routine. A ship does not stop being a ship because the mission is final. Watches must be kept, meals must be prepared. Machinery must be watched, signals must be read, weather must be observed, courses must be maintained, men must move through passages without blocking them, hatches must be secured, reports must be given, the decks must be checked, the sky must be watched. He cleaned, he ate, he waited, he watched, he reported, he checked, he returned. The repetition continued, but now it carried an undercurrent. Everyone aboard understood something, not always the whole, not always officially spoken in the same words, but enough to make conversations lower, enough to make letters harder, enough to make small kindnesses more visible, enough to make a cup of tea held in both hands feel like an entire room of warmth. Enough. There was a particular stillness in men who knew that return was uncertain, not a lack of motion. The ship was full of motion. But beneath the motion, something settled. A man stopped wasting words. Another became gentle with a younger sailor. A third grew irritable because gentleness was too difficult. A fourth cleaned the same tool repeatedly. A fifth slept whenever given the chance, as if sleep could be stored against the future. No one response was pure. People do not become simple because history is near. They become more themselves, and sometimes less. At the chart table, the line toward Okinawa remained. Positions were marked, reports came, orders moved. The chart room lamp glowed over paper. The ship moved across water that looked blank on the page but never felt blank under the hull. Wind changed, clouds gathered, visibility shifted. The sea became grey, then darker grey. Low clouds pressed over the horizon. The weather was not dramatic. It did not need to be. A muted sky can carry more weight than a storm. Grey water, grey air, a ship of grey steel, men in dark uniforms, white wake, low voices, the horizon like a closed door. History would later remember only the final hours. But before those hours there were ordinary ones. Hours of watch, of waiting, of the slow movement of a great ship towards something no one could yet see clearly. This is the part that often disappears. The hours before, the hours when nothing unusual has yet happened, the hours when a man stands watch and sees only sea, the hours when the engines continue, the hours when rice is served, the hours when a photograph is touched and put away, the hours when a sailor lies in his bunk but does not sleep, the hours when a chief checks a passage and finds it clear, the hours when an engineer hears the same steady vibration and knows the ship is still moving, the hours when the sea has not yet taken anything, but already seems to know it will be asked to. On deck, Masao watched the horizon. The sky was low, the sea was steady enough. Wind moved across the exposed surfaces. Spray sometimes reached the rail. The Yamato's size made the sea seem smaller than it was, but only for a while. No ship, however large, can reduce the sea for long. Masao's eyes moved slowly. He did not stare in one place too long. Sky, horizon, water, cloud. Nothing unusual. Sky, horizon, water, cloud. Nothing unusual. Taro nearby learned by watching him. The younger man's attention moved too quickly at first. Masao said, "Slow." Taro slowed. Again. Taro looked. Sky, horizon, water, cloud. The mind wants events. The watch requires patience. Most of a watch is seeing nothing and remaining ready to see. This is difficult. It looks easy to those who do not do it. It is not. A man watching an empty horizon must keep himself awake inside emptiness. The sea does not entertain him. The sea moves, that is all. The watchkeeper must bring the discipline. Below, the mess served another meal. The timing mattered. A ship's internal clock continues even when history has bent around it. Men came in, ate, left. Some spoke, some did not. A bowl in one hand. Chopsticks, tea, steam, the smell of rice and damp wool. The motion of the ship underfoot. A man who had been silent for hours suddenly complained about the soup. Another man answered that complaining proved the soup had done its duty. A small laugh moved through the table. It did not last long. It did not need to. A brief laugh can be enough. Warm enough, human enough, known enough. Kobayashi took out his letter again after eating. He added one line. "I remember the sound of rain on our roof." He stared at it. Then wrote, "If the roof still leaks, place the basin near the back wall, not the door." This made the letter practical again. That helped. Practical words are easier to send than farewell. He folded the paper. He did not seal it. In another compartment, Taro wrote nothing. He only checked the cloth packet. Still there. Photograph. Charm. Leaf. He held the packet for one breath, then tucked it away. The ship moved south. The sea widened. The escorts kept formation. The air above the water remained watched. The men aboard knew the danger from the sky. By 1945, no one serving at sea could ignore aircraft. The old image of battleships deciding the sea by gunfire alone had been changed by years of war. Air power had become a shadow over every surface ship. A lookout did not only watch the horizon, he watched the sky. A sound above water could become everything. But during the crossing, there were long stretches of only waiting. That waiting is part of the story. The human mind often jumps from departure to battle, from order to ending, but ships do not jump. They move, mile by mile, hour by hour, engine turn by engine turn, watch by watch, meal by meal. A doomed ship still travels through ordinary time. No one aboard could skip those hours. They had to live them. If you are still listening, you do not need to hold the whole mission. You do not need to remember every ship in the force. You do not need to follow every movement on the chart. You may let the voyage be simple. A large ship, a grey sea, low clouds, engine steady, men watching, men waiting, men holding small objects in a world too large to hold. In the navigation space, the line continued. Reports came in. The mood was controlled. An officer asked for a position. A figure was given. A time noted. A correction made. The pencil moved. Nothing unusual. The lamp remained steady. The chart lay flat. Outside, the sea moved under cloud. The Yamato sailed on. At night, the ship changed again. Midnight on the Yamato. Now the title returns. The ship moving through dark water toward Okinawa. The sky closed. The sea black, then grey where wake broke it. Lamps low inside. Watch stations alert. Engines deep below, steady and heavy. A man in a passage pausing to let another pass. A cook rinsing a pot. A sailor half asleep with one hand around a cup. A lookout feeling wind on his face. A photograph under cloth. A pencil tucked behind an ear. A pair of boots ready beside a bunk. Nothing unusual, and yet everything unusual beneath it. Midnight has a way of revealing what daylight covers. By day, men are busy enough to hide inside tasks. At midnight, tasks continue, but the mind finds spaces between them. A sailor on watch thinks of home without wanting to. An engineer hears the machinery as if it were breathing for the whole ship. A young man in a bunk listens to footsteps and wonders who else is awake. An officer in the chart room looks at a line and knows it is not only a line. The sea outside is dark. The ship's wake glows faintly where water breaks. No land visible. Only the ship, the escorts, the sky, the engines, the course, and the ancient water. The sea is vast at night. Not because it is larger than by day, because the eye cannot measure it. Darkness removes edges. A man standing above deck may feel the ship beneath him, as the only solid thing left in the world. Steel below, wind around. Water everywhere, nothing unusual, only the sea. Only the mission, only time moving forward. In the engine spaces, Ito remained awake. Perhaps he had slept earlier, perhaps not enough. He stood with the same rag at his belt, the same short pencil, the same listening face. The younger engineer beside him looked exhausted. Ito said, "Drink." The younger man drank. "Eat when you can." "I am not hungry." "Eat when you can." "Yes." Ito did not explain. Men who had been at sea long enough understood that appetite could vanish when needed most. So one ate by discipline, drank by discipline, rested by discipline, lived by discipline until feeling returned later if it did. The machinery remained steady, warm enough, regular enough, powerful enough, enough. Above, Masao and Taro stood another watch. The dark sea moved outward forever. Taro's eyes burned with fatigue. Masao noticed. "Blink." "I am." "More." Taro blinked. Wind touched their faces. Somewhere behind them, a quiet order moved along the deck. No alarm, no sudden movement, only ship life at night. Taro said, after a long silence, "Do you think of home on watch?" Masao kept his eyes outward. "Yes." "What do you think of?" "Laundry." Taro turned slightly. "Laundry. My wife hanging laundry." Nothing more. That was enough. A whole home in one image. Cloth moving in wind, a yard, a woman's hands, weather over land, not sea. Taro looked back to the horizon. "I think of trees." "I know," Masao said. The answer was gentle enough that Taro felt no need to speak again. The ship moved. The sea remained. The night held them. In the mess, a few men not on watch sat with cups. The room was dimmer now. The air smelled of rice, tea, damp cloth, metal, fatigue. One man had fallen asleep sitting up. Another nudged him before his head could hit the table. A third man cleaned a pair of glasses with a cloth. He cleaned them for too long. No one told him to stop. Hands need work. Bell had said that on a different ship in a different story. But the truth belongs here too. Hands need work. A cup, a cloth, a pencil, a valve, a boot, a folded letter, a charm, a map, a rail. Waiting is harder when hands are empty. The Yamato's final voyage was full of hands trying to stay useful. Hands on instruments, hands on cups, hands on ladders, hands folding cloth, hands checking buckles, hands writing lines that did not say goodbye, hands cleaning a passage, hands resting briefly on warm machinery, hands touching a photograph once, then away. The next morning, April 7th, came grey. Not black, not bright, grey. Low clouds, a muted sea, air that felt heavy with weather and distance. The ship continued toward Okinawa. The final day had arrived, but it did not announce itself with a title. It began like a day aboard ship. Watches changed, men ate, reports moved, engines continued, the sky was watched, the sea was watched. Nothing unusual, that phrase again, nothing unusual, until it was no longer true. Before the famous final hours there were still ordinary minutes. A man finishing tea, a man adjusting a strap, a man checking a gauge, a man folding a blanket because leaving it loose felt wrong, a man reading the first line of a letter and not finishing it, a cook scraping a pot, a navigator marking a position, a lookout scanning the sky, a sailor touching the packet under his clothing. The ship was still herself, still moving, still full of rooms, still full of breath. The sea around her was the same sea that had waited at Kura, the same ancient water, though in another place. It did not know Yamato as a name. It knew weight, motion, hull, wake. weather. It knew the pressure of the ship passing through it. It knew the wind. It knew the sky. It would soon know the rest. But before that, there was the crossing. And before the ending, there was this suspended hour. The hour when the men aboard had not yet been taken by history's final image. They were still men inside a ship. Taro, Masao, Ito, Kobayashi, cooks, engineers, lookouts, signalmen, officers, medics, clerks, men with cups, men with letters, men with boots, men with photographs, men who had slept, men who had not, men who knew too much, men who knew only their next station. The Yamato moved beneath the low sky. The escorts moved with her. The sea widened. Reports would soon arrive. Aircraft would soon come. The famous story would soon begin. But this is still the untold part, not the famous version, the quieter one. The final ordinary hours of a doomed battleship, hours of watch, of waiting, of the slow movement of a great ship towards something no one could yet see clearly. If you are listening now, you may drift. You do not need to hold the whole route. You do not need to carry the whole mission. Let the ship carry it for a while. Let the sea carry it. Let the engines continue in the distance. Let the grey water pass along the hull. Let the men remain for this moment in their ordinary gestures, eating, writing, watching, checking, cleaning, waiting. Nothing unusual, nothing unusual. The clouds are low, the engines are steady, the chart is marked, the cup is warm, the photograph is folded, the boots are tied, the watch is set, the sea is vast, the Yamato sails on, and somewhere beyond the grey horizon, the final hours are approaching, still unseen, still unnamed, still only a pressure in the distance. The final hours of the Yamato did not begin with a feeling of legend. They began with watch, with reports, with grey water, with men at stations, with engines continuing, with low cloud, wind, and the old movement of the sea. April 7th, 1945. The date would later become fixed in history, a clear marker, a final day. But aboard the ship, time still moved in ordinary pieces. A lookout's eyes moving across the sky, an engineer reading a gauge, a cook wiping a surface, a sailor tightening a strap, a man finishing tea because the cup was still warm, a man touching a photograph once then tucking it away, a man in the chart room writing a time, a man below deck listening to the ship's machinery and telling himself there was nothing unusual. The Yamato sailed under a grey sky toward Okinawa. The sea was wide around her. The escorts moved with her. The horizon seemed muted. Clouds hung low. The air was neither calm nor violent. It was simply weather. The kind of weather the sea has carried for longer than any human order. In the engine spaces, Ito listened. The great machinery continued. Heat, oil, vibration, pressure, breath. The engines did not know the meaning of a final mission. They knew fuel, load, motion, temperature, alignment. The language of machinery is narrow, and because it is narrow, it is honest. Ito checked a gauge, then another. The younger engineer near him wiped sweat from his neck. The air was heavy. The sound was deep. Metal surrounded them. The ship's heart continued to beat through steel. Nothing unusual, or almost nothing. Above, Masao watched the sky. Taro stood near him, younger, quieter than usual, his eyes moving more slowly now because Masao had taught him how to look without wasting strength. Sky, cloud, horizon, water, sky again. The sea did not offer answers. It only opened outward. The wind pressed against their faces. Somewhere behind them, orders moved along the deck, not rushed yet, not panicked. The ship held herself in discipline. A great ship at sea is a world of controlled motion. Even when the future narrows, the present remains practical. Stand here, watch there, report clearly, move aside, hold the rail, secure that, check again. Nothing unusual. But then the reports began to change. Far away aircraft had been sighted. At first, information moved through the ship in fragments. A report, a confirmation, a change in posture, a tightening of attention. The sky became no longer only sky. The watch sharpened. Men who had been waiting became men preparing. The Yamato was still moving through water, but now the air above the water had entered the story fully. By 1945, the men aboard understood what aircraft could mean. They did not need dramatic language. They did not need speeches. They had lived through enough war, enough news, enough loss, enough changed naval reality to understand. The sky could reach a ship. The sky could find steel on open water. The sky could make the largest vessel feel small. Still, the men did what men do aboard a ship when danger becomes real. They went to stations, they followed orders, they checked what could be checked, they handled what could be handled. They did not become symbols. They remained men inside tasks. He checked, he carried, he loaded, he listened, he reported, he waited, he breathed. In the chart room, the line toward Okinawa still lay on the paper. A pencil rested near it. The lamp was steady. A mark had been made. Another time written. The chart did not tremble. Paper rarely shows the full truth of the room. Outside, the ship's movement continued. Inside, officers and crew worked through the next necessary details. Position, course, aircraft reports, orders. The line on the chart was still clean. The sea was not. The sky was not. Human fear was not. But the line remained, a path drawn through uncertainty. In the mess, the ordinary life of the ship had already begun to dissolve into readiness. Cups were left, bowls shifted. A man who had intended to finish a letter folded it quickly instead. A cook moved items away from where they might fall. The room still smelled of rice, tea, steam, salt, damp cloth and metal. But the meaning of the smell changed. A mess room before action is a place caught between meal and memory. Food remains. Voices change. A cup cools. A man looks back once, not because the cup matters, but because the ordinary world has just stepped away. Kobayashi put the unfinished letter to his sister inside his clothing. The line about the roof remained there. If the roof still leaks, place the basin near the back wall, not the door. A practical sentence. A sentence from home. A sentence from another life. He did not know whether it would ever travel, but for now it stayed close. Taro touched the cloth packet beneath his uniform. Photograph. Charm. Leaf. He did not open it. There was no time. He only made sure it was there. Masao saw the movement. This time he did not tell him to check his boots. There are moments when care must become silence. The first aircraft came not as a single image, but as many points of attention. Sound. Movement. Reports. Shapes in cloud. The sky that had been watched for hours now answered the watching. The Yamato and her escorts prepared to defend themselves. We will not turn this into spectacle. We will not stay in the noise. We will remember it with distance and respect. The guns spoke across the water. The ships answered. Smoke drifted. Spray rose and fell. The cold sea received the force of men's decisions and carried the sound outward until it faded into wind. Aircraft came in waves. The Yamato turned. Men shouted orders. Men repeated them. Men worked the weapons they had been trained to work. Men below kept machinery alive. Men in compartments braced themselves. Men in medical spaces prepared. Men on the bridge watched the sea and sky become one field of danger. The ship that had once been steel in a hidden yard was now fully inside history. But even here, inside the famous final hours, the human details remained. A hand slipping on a wet rail and finding grip again. A mouth dry from smoke and fear. A man searching for a pencil. A man handing water to another without looking. A young sailor repeating an order because repeating it made his own hands move correctly. An engineer leaning close to hear a change beneath the larger sound. A lookout with wind in his eyes. A cup rolling once, then stopping against a wall. A lamp swinging. A photograph pressed flat beneath cloth. A letter folded against the chest. The first strike shook the ship. A great vessel can seem almost impossible until it is struck. Then men remember that steel is not invincible. Steel bends. Steel burns. Steel floods. Steel carries shock. Steel transfers force into bodies. The Yamato absorbed damage and continued for a time. The engines worked. The ship moved. The men remained at stations. Water came where water should not. Smoke came where air had been. The list of problems grew. The great internal city of the ship became harder to move through. Passages changed. Ladders changed. Familiar routes became blocked or dangerous. Men who knew the ship well had to learn her again under impossible conditions. This passage no longer. That ladder. Move carefully. Carry him. Close that. Open here. Report. Repeat. Again. Nothing unusual was gone now. The phrase could no longer hold. In the engine spaces, Ito felt changes through the ship before every report reached him. Vibration altered. Pressure shifted. Heat changed. The machinery still worked, but the ship around it was wounded. He moved from gauge to gauge. The younger engineer looked at him. Ito did not offer comfort he could not justify. He gave orders. Short. Clear. Useful. That was his form of steadiness. A man who cannot make the world safe can sometimes make the next action clear. Check this. Hold there. Watch that. Report if it changes. Drink when you can. Do not stand there. Again. In the medical spaces, supplies became hands. Bandages were used. Water was used. Clean cloth became necessary. Men came in with faces altered by shock, pain, smoke, and disbelief. The medical crew worked inside sound, movement, and heat. They did not have enough of anything. No disaster gives enough. So they used what they had: a table, a cloth, a basin, a hand on a shoulder. A voice saying stay still, a voice saying breathe. A voice saying your name has been written down. Names mattered here too. Even aboard a doomed ship, a name was not cargo. A name was a man held in speech. Above, the attacks continued. The Yamato's guns answered. The sky moved. The sea moved. Smoke drifted low. Spray rose. The ship turned, slowed, adjusted, took more damage. The story of naval battle can be told in numbers: aircraft, torpedoes, bombs, hits, times, angles, lists. Those details belong to history, but tonight we hold the human scale. We hold a man with salt water on his face, a man with oil on his hands, a man with a letter inside his shirt, a man who remembers laundry moving in wind, a man who remembers trees, a man who hears the engines and knows they are changing, a man who gives an order because silence would be worse, a man who is afraid and still moves. Fear was everywhere, but it did not always look like fear. Sometimes it looked like anger, sometimes like silence, sometimes like precision, sometimes like a man doing a familiar task with unnatural care, sometimes like a joke too dry to laugh at, sometimes like a hand touching a charm, sometimes like a sailor checking his boots again for no reason, except that a tied boot was one small proof of order. The Yamato continued to take damage. Flooding spread. The ship began to list. A list at sea changes everything. The floor is no longer certain. A passage is no longer the same passage. A ladder is no longer the same ladder. Objects slide. Water moves differently. Men adjust their bodies without thinking, knees bending, hands reaching. The ship's internal world tilts. The mind resists at first. It expects level. Steel should be level. Decks should be level. Tables should be level. Cups should stay. But the sea and damage rewrite the room. In the mess, bowls shifted. In compartments, loose objects moved. In passages, men braced themselves. On deck, the horizon changed its angle. The sea which had been below seemed to climb. The Yamato was still massive, still powerful, still named with an ancient weight. But now she was also a wounded body in water. The sea had waited since Kure. The sea did not rush. It received each change. More water, more weight, more list, more smoke, more silence in places where men had been. Taro found himself moving through a passage with others. The details were confused, not because he lacked courage, because the human mind cannot record everything inside force. He remembered a hand on his shoulder, Masao's voice perhaps, or someone else's. He remembered the smell of smoke, the angle of the deck, a lamp swinging, a man saying a name over and over, not loudly, but as if the name itself were a rope. He remembered touching the packet inside his clothing and feeling it still there. Then he remembered being told to move, so he moved. Masao, wherever he stood in those minutes, would have watched until watching became action. Lookouts are trained to see. But there are moments when seeing is no longer enough. A man must help, carry, guide, shout, pull, brace, find the next space. The sky above remained full of motion. The sea below remained vast. The ship between them struggled. In the engine spaces, the situation grew worse. The great heart of the ship could not beat forever under such conditions. Ito understood more from sound and movement than many would from reports. He knew when a machine was fighting. He knew when a ship's power remained, but time had narrowed. The younger engineer looked at him again. This time Ito said only, "Stay with the work." It was not enough. It was all there was. Stay with the work. A phrase for machinery. A phrase for fear. A phrase for the final hours of any human task. The ship's list increased. The damage became irreversible. Orders changed. Men who had been fighting the battle now had to fight for survival. This shift is one of the hardest truths at sea. A ship can be a world, a home, a weapon, a symbol, a duty station, a city of steel. Then, if the sea enters too far, it becomes a place to leave. Leaving a ship is not simple. It is not clean. It is not an image. It is cold, difficult, crowded, frightening, and full of decisions made too quickly. But in this story, we do not linger on suffering. We keep distance. We keep respect. We remember the scale without turning it into spectacle. Men moved toward exits where they could. Men helped one another where they could. Some could not. The Yamato tilted further. Smoke and sea and steel became the final environment. The great guns, the armour, the plans, the calculations, the secrecy of cure, the labour of shipyard workers, the midnight watches, the rice bowls, the letters, the oil rags, the pencils, the photographs, the boots by bunks, all of it gathered into the final minutes of the ship. A ship is never only the moment it sinks, it is every hand that built it, every man who served aboard, every meal eaten, every watch stood, every letter written, every ordinary hour that came before the final one. That is why we have spent time in the quiet parts, because without them, the ending becomes too large and too empty. With them, it becomes human. The Yamato rolled and sank on April 7th, 1945. The sea closed over the largest battleship Japan had ever built. The final moments belonged to those who were there, and we approached them gently. There was force, there was smoke, there was water, there was the terrible power of a great ship disappearing. There were men in the sea, there were survivors, there were many who did not return. Of roughly 2,700 men aboard, only a small number survived. The figure often given is 269 survivors. A number can be exact and still fail to hold the full truth. 269, a number of lives carried forward, more than 2,000 not carried home. The sea continued. It always does. That is not cruelty. That is the nature of the sea. The sea received the ship, the sea received the sound. The sea received the heat, the wreckage, the oil, the broken wood, the papers, the cloth, the memories men could not keep. The sea moved, wave after wave, wind over water, cloud over horizon. The escorts that survived continued. Rescue came where it could. Men were pulled from the water, men shook with cold, shock, exhaustion, salt, grief, and the strange disbelief of being alive when so much had vanished. A survivor might remember one thing clearly, not the whole sinking, not the whole battle, one thing, a face, a sound, a piece of floating wood, the taste of oil and salt, the weight of wet clothing, the sky above, the sudden absence of the ship, the feeling of the sea holding him and not caring whether he had a name. Taro may have survived in our story, or he may not. We do not need to decide. The historical Yamato carried thousands of real men, and we will not pretend to know each private ending. But we can imagine the cloth packet, photograph, charm, leaf. Perhaps it sank. Perhaps it floated briefly. Perhaps it remained with him. Perhaps the sea took it without ceremony. Small objects do not always receive endings. They vanish into history quietly. Masao's laundry image, Ito's short pencil, Kobayashi's roof letter, the cook's bowls, the engineer's rag, the cup held in two hands, the boots beside a bunk, the lamp over a chart. The sea received what the story cannot follow. After the Yamato sank, the water settled slowly. Not at once. Nothing settles at once after such force. But the sea has infinite patience. Spray fell back, smoke thinned, sound moved outward and faded. The horizon remained. Clouds moved. The day continued. The great ship was gone from the surface. A shape in the deep now, a word in history, Yamato. For those who survived, the story did not end with sinking. Survival is not an ending. It is another beginning, often heavier than the first. The surviving men carried the final hours in their bodies, in silence, in dreams, in the way certain sounds returned, in the way the smell of oil or salt could become too much, in the way a cup, a blanket, a boot, a photograph, a line of sea horizon might suddenly open a door inside memory. History would later remember Operation Tengo, the sinking, the strategic meaning, the loss of the great battleship, the end of an era. But the untold story remained in smaller places, in families who received news, in workers at Cure who had once shaped the steel, in a draftsman who might read a report and think of a line drawn years before, in a shipyard worker washing his hands and remembering the hull before it entered water, in a sister who never received the final letter about the leaking roof, in a wife hanging laundry in wind, in a home where trees moved without knowing they were being remembered at sea. No one person can carry the whole thing. No one aboard was living inside history as it would later be written. They were living inside the present. And then the present became memory. Years pass. The sea remains. The Yamato lies beneath deep water, no longer a moving city, no longer a ship of engines, watch stations, mess rooms, chart tables, and crowded sleeping spaces. Now she is a wreck, a shape in the dark, visited by silence, touched by currents, known by history but held by the sea. The sea does not preserve in the way paper preserves. It changes things, softens edges, covers, corrodes, hides, reveals in fragments. A ship in the deep is both present and unreachable. Yamato remains there, not as she was at Kura, not as she was at midnight, not as she was on April 6th, not even as she was in the final hours. She remains as the sea has made her, a final form, a quiet one. The shipyard fades, the harbour fades, the voyage fades, the battle fades, the sea remains. For you listening now, there is nothing more you need to follow. The voyage has ended, the hunt has ended, the final mission has ended. You do not need to hold the whole story. You can let it sink gently into the deep water of sleep. You do not need to remember every date. You do not need to remember every technical detail. You do not need to carry the weight of the ship. You do not need to carry the weight of the war. Let the story become simple again. Cure, steel, lamps, workers, water, Yamato, mess rooms, rice, oil, damp cloth, engine heat, cups, blankets, boots, photographs, letters, midnight, grey sea, Operation Tengo, low clouds, a final horizon, the sea receiving everything. Let the images soften. The shipyard fades, the harbour fades, the sea fades. The name becomes soft at the edges. Yamato, a word in history, a shape in the deep, a story carried tonight, not with noise, but with quiet. The men are no longer at stations in your mind. They can rest. The workers at Kura can lower their tools. Kenji can close the drafting room door. Sato can wash metal dust from his hands. Haru can clean the small cut on his palm. The guard can watch the night screens move in the wind. The ship can rest in the harbour before sailing. The crew can return to their ordinary hours. Taro can fold his blanket. Masao can look at the horizon and see nothing unusual. Ito can check the gauge and find it steady enough. Kobayashi can write about the roof at home. A cook can fill a bowl with rice. A sailor can hold a cup in both hands. A photograph can be wrapped in cloth. A pencil can be tucked away. A pair of boots can wait beside a bunk. Nothing unusual. Nothing unusual. The phrase returns not as denial now, but as rest. A ship before the final mission. A quiet passage, a low lamp, a steady engine, a dark sea. Nothing unusual. You may drift now. You may let the facts loosen. The Yamato was built. The Yamato sailed. The Yamato carried men. The Yamato went down. The sea continued. That is enough for tonight. Enough to remember. Enough to honour. Enough to let go. The sea is dark and wide. It does not ask you to understand it. It only moves. Slowly, deeply, without hurry. Breathe in softly. Breathe out slowly. Let the breath become quieter. Let the body become heavier. Let the shoulders loosen. Let the hands rest. Let the jaw soften. Let the eyes be closed. There is nowhere you need to go. There is no task you need to finish. No thought you need to hold tightly in your mind. Only the sea, only the dark water, only the name becoming soft at the edges. Yamato. A word in history, a shape in the deep, a story carried tonight, not with noise, but with quiet. Breathe in softly. Breathe out slowly. Again. Breathe in softly. Breathe out slowly. The shipyard fades. Cranes fading into mist. Lamps low over drafting tables. Steel cooling in the night air. Workers walking home. The harbour fades. secure under a dark blue sky, rope, wood, salt, oil, metal. The inland sea moving gently, the ship at rest. The corridors fade. Mess room, engine room, chart room, sleeping space, deck. A cup on a table, a folded blanket, a lamp under shade. A pencil beside a notebook, boots placed carefully, a photograph wrapped in cloth. The voyage fades, low clouds, grey water, watchkeepers, engines, a chart line. Men eating, writing, checking, waiting. Nothing unusual, nothing unusual. The final sound fades, the sea widens, the horizon softens, the water grows dark and deep. Yamato. A shape below, a silence above, a memory held by the sea. You do not need to follow it farther. Let it rest below the waves. Let the names be held with respect. Let the story be quiet now, not forgotten, only quiet. The sea carries what cannot be carried by one person alone. The sea carries weight. The sea carries silence. The sea carries the last shape of the ship. The sea carries the word until it becomes soft. Yamato. Softly now. Yamato. The great ship is no longer moving. The engines are still. The lamps are out. The chart is closed. The watch has ended. The cups are empty. The blankets are folded. The letters are silent. The photographs are hidden in memory. The boots no longer need to be tied. The sea is wide. The sea is dark. The sea is calm enough for sleep. Breathe in softly. Breathe out slowly. Let the breath become quieter. Let the body become heavier. You're not in the shipyard. You're not at sea. You're only listening in a quiet room. The story has done its work. It has carried you through steel, water, midnight, and memory. Now it can release you. The shipyard fades. The harbour fades. The sea fades. The name becomes soft at the edges. Yamato. A word in history. A shape in the deep. A story carried tonight, not with noise, but with quiet. Breathe in softly. Breathe out slowly. Nothing urgent. Nothing to finish. Nothing to hold. Only quiet. Only water. Only sleep.